In our last lesson, we talked about the different things that are needed to be shown on a foundation plan. So real quickly, I just wanted to look at the example that I gave you and talk about the different things on there. First of all, we see the foundation itself, which is going to be made out of 10-inch CMUs. And then we also show the footing around the perimeter that's underneath the foundation. We have the concrete slab on here, and I can see that by all the control joints that we show. There's also concrete column footings, column pads in the center here, and those support 3-inch steel pipe columns, and this 3-inch steel pipe columns support the beam that's going down the middle. So in the previous lesson we talked about how to select joists and how to select the beam. So now we're going to go forward with actually laying out the columns to support the beam. So in this example, you can see our total distance across here is about 36 feet, and we have that broken into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. So the average distance that a beam can span, a basic simple build-up beam, is 7 to 8 feet. So we're going to use that as our starting point. So in Revit, if we start out with the example that we used in the previous lesson, the first thing that we want to do is find the location for our beam. So we can find out where our columns are going to be, and we can use that as our starting point for our control joints and our column pads. So to do this, traditionally I've done model lines, and instead of model lines, what we're going to do is we're going to use detail lines on the Annotate tab. So whenever I do the detail tabs and pick the detail lines, I'm just going to draw it from this point in the concrete block to that point. And whenever I use detail lines, I can use the same features as the model lines, where I can make it a medium line, a thin line, hidden lines, and later I'll show you how to use the invisible lines also. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Align tool, and I'm just going to align this with a set of stairs, because that's where I want my beam to be placed. And then I can go through and draw my columns. So again, I'm going to use detail line. I'm going to choose the circle, and I'm just going to pick a random point on this line. And whenever I actually draw these, I'm just going to make them a 4-inch radius. In reality, those are only going to be a 3-inch diameter for a 3-inch pipe column, or 4-inch diameter. But if I showed them at that size, they're just not going to show up on the drawing. So I make them bigger, literally, so I can just see them whenever it's printed. So once I have one on there, I'm going to go ahead and get an idea of where my starting point was going to be. Right now, and I'll just do that by adding a dimension to the center to where the bearing point is going to be. And then I can click on my column or my circle, and I'm just going to make this 7.5. Then I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to copy. I'm going to leave the multiple checked, or check it if it isn't checked. And again, I'm going to go 7'6", 7'6". Type in 7'6", because it's not giving it to me. I'll start that over. Copy, and I could also use array if there were a lot of them, but since there's only a few of them, I'm not too worried about using array. what I can see is this one at the end probably is not going to need to be there. But what I could also do is I could move these so that I have one column right here and push this one down this way. If I did that, if I moved these down, something to that nature, then I have one column right here, I have two columns there, and these two columns are going to be hidden in the wall behind the stairs anyways. So that's an option if I want to do that. I'm just going to leave them as they are. I'm going to get rid of this last one, and I'm going to click on my dimension line, edit witness line, and I'm going to add all of the other columns, and then I'm going to take it to my foundation, and you can see that they're all the same except for this last one. So I have this function in Revit where I can click the EQ, and it will move all of my columns to make them equal, and then I can click on them again and I can see exactly what the distance is apart. So right now it's 7 foot 10, 29/32. So if I found a beam, if I designed a beam that can span 8 feet without being supported, then it would be sufficient for what I have here. Okay, so I'm going to leave that at that, and the next step is I'm going to go through and I'm going to start making my column pads. What I really have to decide right now is, do I want this to be left at 10 and 29/32? And one of the big problems is whenever a contractor looks at this, they're not going to measure to a 32nd of an inch. So what I can also do is I can just click this equal, and I can allow them to figure that out. And what they would end up doing is they would just round up, and they would be close, within a 1/4 inch of where they're supposed to be, and we're going to be fine with that. So I'll leave this as EQ, showing that all the distances are equal, and let the contractor figure it out. And I can go back to my detail line, and this time I'm just going to draw a 2 foot by 2 foot or 24 inch by 24 inch square, and I'm going to pick it up and rotate it 45 degrees. And I also need to draw a line from corner to corner so I can find out where the center of this is. And I'm going to select it all, deselect the middle one, and then I'm going to copy. I'm going to copy multiple, and I'm going to make sure my constrain button is unchecked. And I'm going to pick the midpoint of that line. I'm going to copy it to the center of each circle. Now I have my column pads in place, and I want to trim out these lines. So at this point I will go through to my modify menu, and I have to pick split element, and I'm just going to cut these lines. And then I'm going to use my trim tool. Just to clean those up a little bit. And then I'm going to go back to annotate, detail line, and again I'm going to draw the rest of my control joints on. And whenever I do my control joints, what I have here, what type of wall I have is, it's a concrete block wall on the outside, and then there's a framed stud wall on the inside and insulation. So whenever I do my control joints, remember, I'm cutting the concrete slab. That's what I'm really representing, where the concrete slab is going to be cut, and it's going to be cut to the point where it hits the concrete block. This stud wall that's represented right there is actually going to sit on top of the concrete slab. I'll just go through and put all of my control joints in. All right, once I have my control joints drawn on here, I have to look at it and kind of see if I have any problem areas that I need to take care of. I can also do some cleanup work. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to move my dimension string out of the way. The next thing I want to do is look at my problem areas, and basically what I really want to do with these control joints is I'm sectioning the concrete up into individual squares or rectangles, shapes that aren't going to easily crack. And this area right here is jumping out at me as a potential problem area. So right here, this is a place where a crack could occur. This isn't so bad. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my detail line and I'm going to section this part of the slab off. And then I'm going to bring this up to that point. Now I have this semicircle as its own slab, and I have these two sections. And they're not actually their own slab, they just kind of act like that because whenever they crack, they're going to crack hopefully where we have the control joint, or the control joint is going to stop a crack from spreading past that point. The next area I have the same kind of situation here and here, so I can easily resolve that by coming in with a detail line. And with my detail line, I can come across here. It's not giving me a snap point there, so I'll draw it there and then try to move it. I'm basically going to click that. I'm going to use my align tool and try to pick this line and that line to align it to. That worked. I'll just stretch this out on both ends. And then I'll bring this back to that point. And now I have this broke down into nice, neat rectangles for the most part, and the semicircle where I wouldn't have to worry about the concrete cracking as much. So the next thing I want to clean up is this area right here is pretty difficult to see. Kind of hard to understand what's going on there. Whenever you actually print this out, it's just going to look like a lot of lines. So the one tool that I have that I can use to clean this up a little bit is my masking region. So whenever I go to annotate, it's right below detail line where I can come in and I can make a masking region. And I'm just going to draw lines to represent that masking region. And I would do this a lot if I was using AutoCAD, where I can just break lines and show them kind of like they were going underneath something, or if they were there, I just wasn't able to show them. So I'm just going to draw parallel lines, and I want to basically mask that region. So I could go ahead and say okay, and I'll show you what that'll look like. It's just going to cut the stairs out. But the problem is now it leaves this triangle or the outline of the masking region. So what I can do is I can edit this boundary, click on it, edit boundary, and I can select the lines. So I'll just hover and tab, and my line style, I'm going to choose invisible lines, and I'm going to hit the check mark. And now I can kind of see what's going on, and I can see that the stairs are underneath. And that's really how I want to show that. Okay, the next thing we need to do is start putting some annotations on there, some text. So I'm going to come up to the Annotate tab, and I'm going to come over to my text. And the first one that I'm going to put in is, I'm just going to put some text in without a leader. And I'm going to make sure that it's 3:30 seconds text. And I'm just going to come into this location right here, and this is going to be CJ for control joint. And I can literally break the line, and the text will mask it. And I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to constrain this so that it's all aligned in this direction. Make sure multiple is checked, and I will just go across and pick a common point for all those. And I'm going to highlight them all, and I'm going to copy them down to the lower lines also. And now I have all the control joints labeled there. I could go through and do these ones as well, which I will copy. I have to unconstrain that so I can move it down. And I'll just click on it and hit my arrow key until I get it to a place where I like it. And then I'm just going to copy this with the constrain button back on. And I'm not going to put it places in here, like in here where it's already confusing. I think it's pretty clear what they are, that they're control joints. We'll just leave it at that. A lot of times I don't even put all of these in, I might just put a few in. So the next thing is I need to put a note on there to call out what these are. So I will now use a leader. I'm going to pick this, the 2-segment leader, and I'm going to click right here, and I'm going to add some text. So I have a 24-inch by 24-inch by, these ones were 12-inch, 2500 PSI concrete column pad. I'll leave that there. And then the next note, I would come in and I would call out the column. I'll just add that real quickly. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a 4-inch pipe column. And depending on whether or not I have a framing plan, I could also show the beam going across here. The problem with showing the beam going across there is it's going to cover up my control joint, it's going to cover up my columns to a certain point. So I could probably do that somewhere else and show it more effectively. In this example, I also have my exterior dimensions, and you can add those on your own. I also have dimensions that show the distance from the vertical distances, and I also call out the stairs. And those are all things that you want to show on your foundation plan, because you're not going to have the ability to show this stair note anywhere else unless you cut your section, your building section, through the stairs. So it's a good place to add the note. You can see how your basement stairs lay out whenever the contractor is laying out the stairs for the basement. They can very quickly, easily look to see where the location is, how many risers there are, what the riser height is, how many treads, how it relates to the drawing. You can also show mechanical equipment, mechanical and electrical equipment. If there are any windows, you need to add the windows. And the biggest thing with windows is very often in foundations you put in hopper windows, which are very short windows, often 16 inches, sometimes as small as 8 inches, sometimes 24, and they're basically sized for a modular opening. And you have to remember that the foundation is typically covered with dirt, so it's mostly underground, so we very often have very short windows in the basement. So if I put a window up top of the wall and it's only 12 or 16 inches high, my cut plane for my floor plan typically doesn't show it. So what we end up having to do is, in our view properties, we have to change the view range for the foundation plan. Very often you'll bump it up to 6 feet for a cut plane instead of 4 feet. And the last thing that we really have on here, apart from the dimensions, is all of the other symbols. So whenever we put sections on our drawings, reference sections like 2A300 is a building section. I have another building section here, and then a third building section, and often we'd have a typical wall section as well. These symbols need to show up on the foundation plan because I'm cutting through the foundation whenever I create those sections. You also have to have the drawing name and symbol. You have to have this on a sheet, often called the foundation or the basement plan. All the exterior dimensions that show window or masonry openings. And the big thing with foundation plans is anytime you show a masonry opening, instead of dimensioning to the center of the window, you dimension the opening. So in this instance, this is a 2-foot opening for the window. And it's the same over here, instead of dimensioning to the center. And then we also show our offsets and our overall dimensions. And that's really what makes up a foundation plan, and this is going to, in most instances, be enough to show for the contractor and the building inspector.